All right, welcome back, everybody. Mike Dokter here from House Basketball. I coach the high school girls basketball team over at Sport House in Muskegon, Michigan, with the Michigan Basketball Academy. These videos we are reading through Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf. This was our book this year. And if you like this video, go ahead and watch the others. Got a full playlist of the entire book. This is a sequel to the book Chop Wood, Carry Water, also by Joshua Medcalf. That is also recorded with thoughts on each chapter. So we're going to read chapter 23 and 24 today. We just finished chapter 22, obviously, because that's how numbers work, where we found out that Russ, Jason's mentor, was very different than what Jason had assumed based on how he handled himself. So we're going to go into Russ's speech here at South by Southwest. So Chapter 23, Build Wisely. The next hour was a blur. Jason couldn't believe that for the past 2.5 months he hadn't figured out who Russ really was. But a quick Google search gave him the basics. Russell Carter was a legend in the world of business. He had built 2 industry-changing businesses, one in food service and one in advertising, had written several New York Times bestsellers, and had served on the board of almost a dozen Fortune 500 companies. Clearly, Russ had to be a multi-millionaire. Jason tried to think it through, but it didn't get any clearer. Like the fact that Russ was incredibly wealthy, but also worked as a street sweeper. The fact that Russ knew TD like an old friend, but never once name dropped. Or the fact that Russ and Jan still lived in the smallest house on the block when Jason knew they could easily afford a palace anywhere. It just didn't make sense. But all that faded away as Russell began to speak. He was a commanding electric speaker who held the whole room's attention in his hand. Jason got lost in his words. I want to tell you the story of a friend of mine named Koda. He lived in Japan and designed homes for 30 years, and he became a true master of his craft. It wasn't talent that made him great, but his passion and grit. He was always the first in and the last out at work, and no matter the obstacle, he treated every home as if it was his own and poured his heart and soul into everything he built. After 30 years, he told his boss that he was retiring, but his boss told him that their company had just received a contract to build a home for a very important client, and they really wanted him to be the one to build that house. Koda was very frustrated, but after talking it over with his wife, he reluctantly agreed to build one last house. He made it very clear that this was his last one. And the difference with this one was obvious. His heart simply wasn't in it. He phoned it in. He showed up late and left early. He didn't put in the care and attention to detail that he normally did. He knew it would be up to code, but he also knew it was far from his best work. He had built homes 20 years ago that were much better. But sure enough, it passed inspection. And at the final project meeting, his boss told him, "Thank you, Koda. We have just one more thing." Koda was really upset by now because he thought they were going to ask him to build another house. But instead, the boss just gave him a small box with a red ribbon and said, "We are so grateful for you. Your years of mastery have made this company great. And this gift is a small token of our appreciation." Koda opened the box and discovered a set of shiny new keys. His boss smiled. "The house is yours. You deserve it." And instantly Koda's heart sank, because unbeknownst to him, the whole time he had been building his own house. And he, of all people, knew what that meant. A powerful silence fell as Russ continued. "The truth is, with every decision we make, each and every one of us are building our own house. But unfortunately, most people don't operate this way. In business and in life, most people lack patience and play the short game instead of the long game. They chase quarterly bottom lines instead of lasting legacy. Cutting corners to maximize short-term profits might work for a little bit, but will always come at the expense of what truly matters: the relationships and consumer trust that built a legacy." As far back as Jason could see, heads were nodding and the room was on the edge of their seats listening to Russ. He shook his head, overwhelmed by how surreal this experience was. All right, so those of you who have been with me for a while have ever heard me speak or taught or teach on accountability or any of those other things, this is a story that you've heard before, right? This is not a new story, and it's a great story, right? Building your own house. It's absolutely fantastic. And the principle, of course, of the story, Russ explained, Every decision we make is adding up to something. A ton of feathers still weighs a ton, right? And when we look at what we're putting out there into the world, into our efforts, whether it's for a sports team, whether it's for academics, whether it's for our family, whether it's for our friendships, whatever it is, relationships, personal relationships, whatever it might be, we are building our own house and we're making our own bed. You probably heard that one from your mom or dad before. You made your bed, you got to sleep in it. It's the same principle, it's the same idea. Everything that you do is adding up to something. And it's either moving you in a net plus direction or a net minus direction. And so the thing that I would really like for you all to get out of this idea in this chapter is that everything you do does matter. It does matter. Maybe not the way that you think, but it does matter. The little decisions you make every single day, the discipline and grit that you show every single day to either becoming better or encouraging somebody else or whatever else that might mean, all of those things matter and they add up. And those things will come to harvest, so to speak. You reap what you sow. A really smart man 2,000 years ago said that. You reap what you sow. You're going to sow in certain fields. You're going to provide certain care to certain things, and you're going to get back what you put into it. And that's just a universal principle. It's the way this world was created. It's the way that we were put together and masterfully designed by our Creator. And this story really speaks to that. So that's what I'd like you all to get out of this chapter. All right, chapter 24, failure. Afterward, Jason followed the flow of people exiting into a massive lobby area, which was decked out for a party. Toby Nwigwe, I think that's how you say it. I don't know. I'm sorry, Toby, if you're watching this, which I'm sure you won't, because again, I'm not that important, so you'll probably never see this. But Toby, or Tobe, T-O-B-E, Nwigwe, N-W-I-G-W-E, was performing a set on stage, and everyone mingled around tall tables in the soft lighting discussing the keynote. Jason looked around for Russ as, Jason? The woman approaching him was warm, well-dressed, and graceful. She introduced herself as Caroline, an old friend of Russ's. Russ tells me you've been pounding this stone all summer doing door-to-door sales. How's it going so far? Jason wasn't quite sure who this woman was and why Russ would have been talking to him Jason wasn't quite sure about who this woman was and why Russ would have been talking about him to her, but he answered honestly, not very good. I'm not even close to my goal. What's that? 1,200 books. Wow, that's definitely a lot, especially for a first summer. Do you know who Sarah Blakely is? He shook his head and she chuckled. I guess you've probably never needed any of the products she's created. She founded a company called Spanx at 27 years old, and she became a billionaire from that company over the next decade. Jason was a bit confused as what this had to do with him. Interesting. By itself, it's not that interesting at all. But her backstory of what she did before she founded Spanx is very interesting. She did door-to-door sales just like you, selling fax machines. What's a fax machine? Caroline blinked and then laughed. Well, I guess you could say it's an early version of a scanner. Anyway, she said something insightful about how that job led to her billion-dollar success. Well, what did she say? She said, I didn't realize that selling fax machines door-to-door was really laying the groundwork for me to be able to be an inventor and create a product that had never been done before and bring it to the market. Because of doing something like that requires hearing the word no a lot. Cold calling to sell fax machines was an amazing training ground for hearing no. I just learned that there's a formula. You have to go through a certain number of no's to get a yes, so don't let it discourage you. Jason nodded, sighing. Well, I've certainly heard a lot of no's. Carolyn glowed. She seemed genuinely excited about that. That's fantastic. It sure didn't feel that way. Jason looked down, ashamed. I'm sure Russ has told you too many times to count already, but this summer is really about who you are becoming, not about what you're achieving. The character you're building through this process is what's truly important. Jason nodded, but that advice sounded like a foreign language to him. Caroline noticed and went on. Let me ask you something. If you were to fall short of your sales goal, what would that be? Failing? Which would make you what? A failure? Carolyn's eyes filled with compassion. Jason, you couldn't be more wrong. See, I'm going to get choked up again. Our culture has gotten so confused about what failure really is. The truth is, failure does not make you a failure. Why? Failure is an event, not an identity. Would you consider Babe Ruth a failure? What? No way. He's one of the greatest baseball players of all time. And yet, in 1932, when he set the record for both home runs and the highest batting average in a season, he also set another record for most strikeouts. But Babe Ruth isn't remembered for his failures. He's remembered for his successes. Why? Because failure is an event, not an identity. In fact, if you look at the list of record holders for most strikeouts in MLB history, you'll notice that almost every single one of the top 20 names is also one of the most powerful batters in history too. And like Babe Ruth, all of them understand something really important. If you want to hit a lot of home runs, you have to be willing to strike out a lot. Jason nodded, knowing that made sense. Still, it seemed strange. It went against everything he knew and felt about failing. Sensing this, Caroline went on. Unfortunately, we've attached so much shame to the event of failure as a culture that most people are simply too afraid of it to ever do what is necessary to become great. And they push through... All right, I'm going to read that chapter again, or that sentence again, paragraph again, because I'm kind of fogged up. Unfortunately, we've attached so much shame to the event of failure as a culture that most people are simply too afraid of it to ever do what is necessary to become great and push through however many no's it takes to get their eyes on their yes, like Sarah Blakely. I guess that's right. I just wish I knew how many it takes. But that's not the point. If you knew the number, you would know the outcome. And the outcome won't help you. Only the process will. It's like that old poem, The Stonecutter's Credo. Pound the stone? Carolyn nodded, and Jason couldn't believe it. How do you know that? Russ told me about it, actually. He said he learned it from a friend of his named TD. Jason chuckled as she continued. Anyway, the poem talks about pounding the stone 100 times with... The poem talks about pounding the stone 100 times without a single crack showing. So for 100 blows, the stonecutter appears to be a failure. And if they stopped at blow 100, they would stay that way. But instead, blow 101 splits the stone. Now, is the stonecutter any different as a person? Has their identity changed? No, Jason shook his head. They just swung the hammer one more time. Exactly. That swing didn't make them any more or less of a failure than they were on the 100 other swings. What matters is that they kept on swinging. Jason nodded as she went on. So whenever you're beginning to doubt yourself, just remember the stonecutter, and remember, life might look like failure 99% of the time. But failure is temporary. And if you choose to always learn and grow from it, then you never really fail at all. Jason had been so locked up in their conversation that he looked around. He realized the room was mostly empty. He couldn't believe they'd been talking for a few hours. But he was grateful that he'd met Caroline, and he felt a whole lot better about the job. And for the first time, he actually looked forward to Monday morning and couldn't wait to put his new knowledge to work. When Russ finally arrived to drive them home, Jason couldn't help but ask him, "So, why didn't you ever tell me who you were?" I can't even get to the last sentence, guys. Russ smiled back. "What I do doesn't define who I am. Like I said, there's always more sides to a box." All right. Chapters 23 and 24 done. I warned you in the last video I was going to tear up again. And this one was a little real to me. I think you all get the point. But I'm going to share with you some thoughts on why I get choked up about that stuff. I have screwed up more times than I can even recall and say to you and remember in a video like this. I try to keep them to 15 to 20 minutes. I got 20 seconds left before 15 minutes here. I am far from what the world would consider successful, but I have a really, 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 really amazing life that I'm super grateful for. Things are going very well right now, but it's been a massive struggle to get here. My family, thankfully, doesn't really want for anything. We have the ability to be able to do cool stuff. We have the ability to be able to travel. We have the ability to be able to eat out when we want and get toys when we want them, whatever the heck it is. We have that ability. And I'm very grateful for that. And I know that has nothing to do with me, but it has everything to do with God's grace in the situation and allowing me to become a better person so that I can actually take the action to share with you all in one way or another, whether it's here on this video, whether I'm coaching you, whether I'm speaking or teaching with the university, whether I'm speaking at another event that I've been asked to speak at, and whether it's in my other jobs or whatever else it is. I have the ability to be able to share with you the fact that failure is okay, and it's part of the process, and it's part of the human condition, and it's part of we have such shame in our failure because of our culture and because of when we try to do it our own way and we try to own it. And we try to think that we're in control of everything, and we try to think that, we know best. When we don't do things as we perceive as right or the right way to do them, we automatically internalize that. And we internalize that because we have put the entire narrative on ourselves. And when you put the entire narrative on yourself and you make it all about you and what you can do and what you can produce, the second you don't do that thing, you're considering yourself a failure. And you're only a failure if you A, perceive yourself that way, and B, don't have the bigger picture in mind. Don't have the bigger story in mind. I had a great mentor, Lee Escobar, one time say, he always said, failure is feedback. All it is feedback. It allows us to be able to understand that we need to do something differently the next time we try something and the next time we engage in something. And that allows us to be able to get better, to learn and grow. And that's what it's all about. The failure allows us to learn and grow. If you're getting told no, if you're failing in sports, if you're failing in life, if you're failing in relationships, if you're failing financially, if you're failing in your business, whatever it is, I've done it all. I promise you, every single one of those things I've listed, I've screwed up at. Every single one of those things that I've listed, I've failed at. It's okay. Everybody does it, and it's part of the process, and you become better for it. What matters is what you do with that information and how you take that information forward to be a better version of yourself. So, a little bit longer video, guys. I appreciate you. I'm sorry for that. Being a little bit longer. Excited to continue working through the book with you, Pound the Stone by Joshua Medcalf. We'll talk to you next time. Bye now.